I wanted to start by talking about the first year that I grew ranunculus. So at that point, I had been a gardener for 20 years, and I felt like I knew my way around growing vegetables and flowers. And I had also started my commercial flower farm, so I did not feel like I was a beginner. But when I decided to figure out how to grow ranunculus, it was so confusing. I felt this huge amount of uncertainty because as I was looking things up and trying to figure it out, it felt like, well, depending on your zone, you might do this. There were things you wanted to be aware of. And so it felt really confusing. And I want to put that out there to normalize that ranunculus has this sense of being a trickier flower because it honestly is. But luckily, my first attempt worked and I got beautiful plants and they started to bloom. And I was absolutely thrilled until about a week later when the spring temperatures like flew into summer weather. It was, summer overnight, it was high 70s, and all of the buds blew open and the plants went dormant. So I was pretty crestfallen about that. And the problem I realized, because I needed to figure out what went wrong, is I made the number one mistake, which is that I planted my corms too late. Because ranunculus are a cool flower, they want to be planted and established before the last frost, and they'll go dormant above 70 degrees. So mine had just started to bloom, but they hadn't had enough time to be in their bloom period before we got to that 70, above the 70 degrees. So I made myself a promise that I was going to get it right. I wanted to grow these flowers. I had some of the blooms, they were so beautiful. So that winter, I researched, I did a really deep dive, I took lots of notes, and I made a plan, and I was absolutely ready to get it. And then the next spring, it was amazing. I had done three successions, and the first two were just incredible. Like I felt that they were, picture perfect. I was so thrilled. And then the third succession was not so great. It was a little bit more like my first year where it was a little late and it kind of petered out, but I didn't really care because I had ranunculus, they were beautiful. I had figured so many things out. And then people started to go crazy for ranunculus. So this was the thing that I didn't really expect, but all of a sudden I had neighbors and customers and friends telling me this is my favorite flower on the planet. People I didn't realize would really read my email newsletter are responding and they want to talk about ranunculus. And then my gardener friends and my customers who garden started asking me some growing tips because people really wanted to grow it. And I remembered that confusion from my own experience. So I took all my notes and put them together and I made a free guide. And I thought, hey, if I can help someone grow ranunculus, I want to. So I put it out there and a lot of people bought corms for me and took that guide. And then I started to hear from people like Laura, who had the same experience that I had, which is that she was an experienced gardener who felt like she knew how to grow flowers, but for some reason, ranunculus were baffling her. And she found some success. So it turned into like a few years where I sort of started to coach people on the side around growing ranunculus. And it was really fun for me. And I was learning more about what questions people had. And so I decided to kind of roll that all in together and make a short digital course that's called Grow Ranunculus Right. So that's what the giveaway will be today. Someone's going to get free lifetime access to that. And I'll talk a little bit more about my course later on. But first, I'll just kind of back up. And I think we had started to say this in the beginning that I came into flower farming from a 20-year teaching career. So for most of those years, I taught high school English. And then for a number of those years, I was an instructional coach. And so that meant that I was a teacher of teachers. And my day looked like I was in one-on-one coaching sessions with teachers or facilitating team meetings, or I actually spent a lot of time with principals and helping them with the instructional plan. And I was a gardener. So I came into flower farming, with a long history of gardening. And so I think Deborah had said it like kind of merging the parts of my life, teaching people flowers is like, that is my absolute happy place. And at my flower farm, we grow 4 seasons. So Deborah mentioned the winter tulips. We have my farmhouse cellar is filled with about, I don't know, 8,000 tulips growing right now. So we grow on about half acre plus, and that's because we're half acre in the field, but that plus is my cellar that pumps out thousands of tulips in the winter. And our primary outlets are CSA. I kind of call it a farm stand in quotes because it functions like a farm stand, but it's really inside of a retail bakery and then workshops. And so here's some of the flowers that we grow a lot of, and then included, of course, is ranunculus. So there are so many questions that people have for ranunculus, but here are a few that I thought I could talk you through today, and kind of just, maybe give a little bit of insight on some of these. So timing is a big question people have. Soaking, which varieties to grow, and then what do you do with your corms at the end of the season? So I mentioned in my story about trying to grow it the first year that timing is such a big deal, right? So with ranunculus, timing is everything. The things you want to get right are when do you soak and sprout, when do you transplant, and when do you harvest. So timing, it's not something where, like, say you put a zinnia seed in the ground and you just know you have to be past frost. You're with ranunculus, you're trying to work on timing through the whole growing process. And I think that that's a lot of why it can feel like a tricky flower. The common wisdom says you think about your zone and your last frost date. But then I really like to add two more pieces to that. I think that your location is really critical. So whether you're going to plant it out in a field or in a high tunnel, and then also your goals. So here's an example, and I pulled this out of a couple of screenshots from my course material. So just looking alone at zone and location, this is this is where ranunculus can become really personalized to whatever your location and context is. So if I was in zone 5 and I was planting in the field, I'd be looking at probably a spring planting time. But if I was in zone 5 and I had a high tunnel, then I might be planting out in the fall, right? So it's that answer of, well, I live in zone 5, when should I plant? It's unique to your location. And the same thing, just to show you zone 8, for example, in zone 8 in the field, you have a little bit of a longer stretch to get your corms out. But, over here in zone 5, you're not going to be planting out in January. So there's not really a one size fits all answer of when to plant. So one of the things that I did is made a free quiz that it's like your first step to start to answer this question, if that's a question that you still have. You're gonna plug in your zone, your location, a little bit about your goals, and you're gonna get the best response as kind of your jump off starting point. So that's something you can find on my website. If you go to the Grow Ranunculus tab, you'll find that quiz there. And I'll talk a little bit later again about the context, but you could run yourself through that quiz more than once and change your answers. And that would start to help you understand how changing a little bit about what your aim is might change the outcome of when it is that you want to plant. So another question that people have is about soaking corms. And this is one of these things that I see on the Facebook forums a lot where someone's like, how do you soak corms? And someone will say, I don't soak them, I just plant them out. And someone else will say, you need to soak them for 2 hours. So this question of should I soak corms before planting? Like my easy answer is going to be probably. But I want to help you understand why soaking, especially if you're just starting to grow, why that is better. So once you you get this dry, shriveled corm, once you put it in water and hydrate it for a few hours, it's going to get really soft and plump. And what's happening is you're activating the growing process. But the other thing that's happening is you're encouraging uniform growth, right? So, if you are going through the process of soaking and sprouting, you're the person who's giving the corm the water and then putting it in this type of soil. And that process is going to be a lot more uniform than just putting them outside and maybe it rains, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's a wet corner, maybe it isn't. And the process of soaking, it speeds up their ability to sprout, which I believe is going to help reduce how much rot could potentially happen. So it's kind of like if you grow dahlias, you don't want to put your tuber out and then have it just sitting in water because it's going to rot. It's that same thing with the corm. Until it's sprouted, it's going to be more susceptible to rot. And soaking corms, I think if you're starting out, the answer should always be yes, you should soak and sprout your corms. If you become experienced and you've done it for a bunch of years, maybe it becomes optional. I'm very pro soak. I think I will always be pro soak, and I'll never want to just put my dry corms out. And some of those reasons are corms are costly, right? It's a high cost, thing to buy in. And I really want to be counting that every corm I plant is going to lead me to stems. It's easier for me to monitor if I soak and sprout ahead of time before I plant them out. I know that everything I'm planting out is sprouting and it's ready to grow. And then that just gives me peace of mind. So I'm going to be really pro soak and pro soaking and sprouting ahead of time. So that's again one of those things where, like I had said before, you might talk to other growers and they might say you can just go ahead and plant them. I would encourage you to do this step of soaking and sprouting if you're getting started. And then another really big question people have is around varieties. So there are lots of, there's of course lots of colors of ranunculus, but there are so many varieties. And I wanted to help you think about your varieties in terms of your outlet and your budget. So I'll kind of talk you through why would some of these make sense for you more than others. If you're starting out and your outlet is more like a market bouquet, then these first two varieties, they're going to be like the perfect starting point for you. They're going to be, more cost effective. To your customers, they're going to think ranunculus is ranunculus, right? So they're not going to have that discerning eye necessarily to need like a fancier variety. And then if you get some ranunculus growing down, maybe you've got a season, you've grown it for a season, maybe you want to try and start to bridge out and get some better varieties. You might start to look at these middle ones like Romance or Elegance. These might command a higher stem price. And if you're starting to get into design, you might find that just the petal quality is more beautiful. This here is a picture of Elegance Salmon, and I love this variety. It's really beautiful. And then there are the cloned varieties. If you don't follow Ownings America on social media, I would recommend you do. They are breeding so many incredible ranunculus varieties. I believe that in the next few years, we're going to see lots of new varieties coming to market, and there really have been more varieties available recently. And the question to think about if you want to try these ones is, do you have some fancier end use that would really warrant maybe a 2 to 3 times cost per corm than, say, growing the Amandine, which is kind of like a workhorse variety. The other thing about the patented varieties is that these can't be saved, and they're more expensive because there are some royalties involved, right? Because the breeders are trying to push the limits of what's available to growers. And then when you're sourcing corms, when you're thinking about your goals and budget, another way to look at where or who do you want to get them from. If you're going to grow hundreds to thousands, you absolutely want to have your wholesale account set up. That's going to be the most cost-effective way. But if you're growing, 10 to a couple of hundred, you might just want to buy them from a flower farm. A lot of flower farms buy in extra corms and sell them as a way to get a little bit of fall cash. This is something that you can do. So I actually buy a lot of them in wholesale, and then I usually buy maybe 20 or 40 every year from flower farms when I just want to trial a fancier variety. I'm not ready to commit, to like 500 or 300 of it. Maybe I just want 40. So that can be a really fun way to kind of expand what you're growing without having to commit to a huge amount. And then wholesale is going to be spring ordering. And I wanted to emphasize that there because that means you want to know your type, size, color, and quantity. When ranunculus is coming into bloom, you're going to be ordering it for the next season if you want to get really good colors or, sizes before they sell out. And then that'll be a fall delivery. But if you're ordering from a flower farm, you have a little more time to kind of figure out your what you want to grow because mostly flower farms will start to list their corms like maybe late summer or early fall. And then you'll get in the corms in the fall as well. And so I pulled this out of my course. So something that I done is created kind of a recommended place to get corms. And I set it up for home gardeners and commercial flower farms, right? Because like I still buy, from like I've bought from Petal Pink before, I've gotten corms there. So even though I mostly buy from Ownings, I'll still buy in from these flower farms. So these are just, some suggested places that you might want to source. And to point out in the wholesale, one of the differences is that the type of corms available are going to be different. So you might, at say Leo Burby, or you might be able to get Amandine, whereas at Ownings, that's where you would get Elegance. And so you might want to look into the different wholesalers and see if they actually carry the type that you want to grow. And then once your beautiful blooms are done growing and the temperature gets above 70, your plants are going to start to go dormant. And then you have a decision to make of what are you going to do with these corms. So the three things you can do is you can leave them in place and see if they'll regrow. That mostly works for varieties, but not all of them. You can dig and store, or you can dig and compost them. And so if you're going to leave them in place, a few things of note is this is really only going to work in a mild climate where you don't have to be worried about rot or frost damage. So if you leave them in the field, it's possible if you have a really wet winter, everything could rot because they're not growing. Once they're growing, they're going to be able to absorb moisture, but if they're just sitting there dormant, they might, get rotten. If you have patented varieties, you can't leave them in place. So part of the agreement of patented varieties is that you'll kind of destroy them after the year and not grow them a second time. But you could also, if you wanted to try to leave them in place, and if they're not patented, then you could interplant. So we find that sometimes when we dig up our ranunculus, we follow it with celosia in our tunnel, in our rotation, and we'll always leave a few corms. Like we think we get them all up, but we don't get them all up. The celosia grows up, and then as everything dies back, the next winter we see ranunculus coming back up in that spot where the celosia had been. So if you do leave them in place, you could try to play around with, is there something you could grow over them, while they're just sitting there and not being active in the summer months. And then digging and storing is literally after the leaves die back, you're going to dig them up. They're going to be kind of dirty and you set them on a shelf. And at some point, you might dust off the dirt a little bit more, maybe bag them up. And you're essentially starting the process over again with the corms that you have, saved from that year. But you can't do this for your patented varieties either. So, again, with those fancier ones, just something to keep in mind. And then for digging and composting them, that's what you need to do for patented varieties. And then, of course, you need to be ready to reorder your fresh corms. So, things to think about would be labor. For example, if you want to dig and store your corms to grow them again, maybe that makes perfect sense for you. Maybe it doesn't if you have a really big farm and a lot going on. Maybe just the labor of storing and bagging and labeling is, not for you. Reliability is a question. So my understanding is that you can assume to have a pretty good return rate on corms you've saved, but you may not get like a 100% return rate. And then your budget and goals. So something you could do is just trial different methods to kind of see what works for you. And then some people will keep their corms, so they'll dig them up and save them, but they'll order fresh corms. So they're gonna like buy in new ones, but they can scale their ranunculus plan by growing on last year's corms again. So that could be a more cost-effective way to end up growing more ranunculus than maybe you want to, put all the money out for at once. And you can sort of build up your ranunculus cash a little bit that way. Okay, so I want to just talk you through for a minute this point around kind of context and the personalization of ranunculus. So Imagine that I am a CSA farm in Zone 5A. This might be what I would do, right? I might fall plant my ranunculus in the tunnel. Maybe I plant my elegance there. And then in the spring, maybe I plant amandine. After the season, I'm going to dig in compost. I'm going to mostly buy from ownings, but maybe 1 to 2 farms, right? That's kind of me right there. Or maybe I'm a flower farm that focuses on weddings in zone 8. And now I'm going to fall plant in the tunnel elegance and some of those patented varieties because I want the really extra special blooms. I have to dig in compost because I have patented varieties and I'm just going to order wholesale. Or I have a farm stand in zone 7 and I'm going to fall plant only the amandine and I'm going to dig and save because every year I want to sort of increase my stock of ranunculus without breaking my budget. And I'm going to mostly buy wholesale, but now maybe I want to try butterfly corms, a new fancy variety. So I buy those in from a flower farm, right? So this idea of, you know, what do you grow and when do you plant it? It's really going to be based on your context in a really personalized way. So those are some of the big questions. I know there's a couple other questions I want to answer now because I heard those before the session started, and I'm sure that you have questions, right? There's no way in 20 minutes that I can answer all the ranunculus questions, but are there questions at this time, things that you're still wanting to have make sense?
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Brooke. I'm going to, I think, jump in if that's okay, and
Yeah.
help walk you through some of the questions. And if folks have been putting questions in the chat, feel free. We've got plenty of time. We've got at least 15 minutes here. I'm going to go ahead and get started and try to synthesize these. They're somewhat zone specific. Deb Majerus from Iron Butterfly Flower Farm. She's in Rochester, Minnesota, zone 4. I had heard from her earlier, and I think I emailed you this question, Brooke,
Hmm.
about zone 4. But her follow-up question is, when you say high tunnel, do you mean single layer plastic or double? So maybe you can kind of wrap all of that into one comment.
I think that either counts for your high tunnel. The thing about ranunculus is they're going to want protection under 25 degrees temperature. So whether you have single layer or double layer, just whenever your temperature in that tunnel falls below 25 degrees, they're going to want the frost protection. But they will be, they would be able to grow in a single layer plastic. You're giving them the right frost protection when they need it.
I'm going to take Deb off of, Deb, you've got your mic on. Do you want to add anything else?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to do you know anyone in zone 4 that's doing that successfully? Like I do have a friend that's overwintering in a double layer hoop house, but I haven't this year I'm putting up a single layer and I don't have electricity to that area, so I can't put a double layer blower in there
Mhm.
unless so I just don't want to plant tons of ranunculus in there and then have them die,
Yeah.
you know?
So what I would recommend and what I sort of call out zone 4 in my course a little bit differently because you have a different environment is what's generally recommended is for you to plant out like if it was my first year I would probably do a very early spring planting like maybe 6 weeks before your last frost date.
Yeah,
But
I did. I successfully.
I would grow them on inside for 6 weeks in a 50 cell tray so that when you go to plant out in that 6 week period, you're not just planting out a little sprouted corm that you're like planting out a pretty sturdy plant. That can be a really common strategy for zone 4.
Yeah, I did that last year under a low tunnel. Like I successfully started them really early, grew them up and planted them in the spring. But I was really hoping that I could plant them in the high tunnel this year. But that's why I was wondering, because it seems like everything I see out there says zone 5. I don't know if
Yeah, and
anyone's like for sure doing it in zone 4 or you're like, I think you could, but I don't really
I
know.
I think it's the same answer, right? So my climate, we're zone 5, but we were under 20 degrees weather for maybe a 10-day stretch already this year, right? So it gets very cold here. And so in the tunnel, like they're just getting the frost cloth, right? So I think that if you are if you have that single layer plastic and you are able to give them the frost protection, I think that you are probably going to be able to support them in the winter. Some of the issues might just be that what we try to do when it's above freezing here is we like vent everything out. So if it's 34 degrees out, the tunnel is open, the frost cloth is off, and everything gets to breathe. So some of the concerns about a long season in undercover in a tunnel in your zone might just be that the ventilation isn't there. And it could be that it could be problematic, in other ways, like maybe potentially for disease or, they're not getting the fresh air return. If
Okay.
I was in zone 4 and I had a high tunnel single layer, I would probably plant some of mine in the fall and plan to give it frost protection. And then I would save a good amount of my corms. And then I would do that early spring planting. And then I would go through that year and figure it out. Because my zone 5 where I live is much colder than zone 5 from like even my employee who farms at another farm. Their zone 5 looks really different than mine does. And so it might just be something you do to get a little bit of an experiment going.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Deb, I'm going to move on to another question, but hopefully this will lead to great success in your farm. Kelly Jane Nichols says, I'm a home gardener in Seattle, zone 9A. I put a low tunnel over last year's Ranunculus to see if they'll winter over. When should I remove the tunnel and expose them? Am I looking for growth or waiting for the last frost?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I kind of just shared that a moment ago. The low tunnel is a little bit of a dance. We like to ventilate a lot because it's a cool flower, and I want to try to, prohibit anything that might like be fungal or some kind of disease. So the airflow is really good. So our rule is that if it's over 40, we have all the frost cloth open and the tunnels are open. And then when we're, above freezing but below 40, it depends on what we're doing on the farm that day. Like if it's a Friday and I'm tired, maybe I just leave them covered. So in your climate, if you're getting above freezing, that would be a great time for you to vent them. And that might be something that you want to do pretty regularly. And, it just depends on how quickly your temperature shifts come in.
Great. Thank you. Kathy Lowther asked, and Kathy just addressed fertilizer requirements and frequency, and then forcing in crates. How many corms would you recommend per crate?
Yeah, so the crate question, somebody else asked that. I've grown them 20 per crate. I've only crate grown inside where I have my whole winter tulip set up and I wondered, can I grow them under lights? So they grew beautifully in the crate, but they were pretty leggy. Like if I had moved them outside, I think they would have done really well. Um, but this winter we're growing some in crates to just kind of experiment and see. But 20 is the pretty common number in the crate, and you could fit more, but then you're just kind of thinking about things like airflow. So 20 is a good number. And then the other question was fertilizer. And I go into this in the course too, but it's always hard to say, do you need fertilizer? Because really what everybody needs is a soil test. And for years here, we were soil testing and adding compost, every time we planted. And we've actually gotten to the point where we're not adding any more compost. And the only thing low in our soil ever is nitrogen, which is common. So we don't plant our ranunculus with anything. That's fairly common. If you wanted to plant with something, then usually a balanced fertilizer is what's recommended, but that's because it assumes that you won't then, spike in one of your areas. If soil testing feels overwhelming, I want to just throw it out there that I've done a number of them, and I recently switched over to mysoiltest.com. I couldn't believe how easy it was to do, but the data that they give you is so simple. And, compared to doing the one through my extension office, which is what people will often say, I'm like, I'm not an affiliate. I love their soil test. So you could try that out.
Diane Metler says we have to plant in crates. Is there anything more she should be aware of in terms of tips? She's in zone 6B Western Washington?
I think somebody else had, when we were talking about crates, I think the question is, um, just being mindful in crates, they're going to need the same amount of frost protection, right? So that's something to be mindful of. And then the other thing that I would want to be extra mindful of is the water usage. So when they're little and they're, lightly greened up, they're not going to want a lot of water. And then as they're getting into bud and bloom phase, they're going to want more water. And my assumption would be that anything in the crates, like I've grown tulips and lilies in crates, that they might need more water as the season goes on. So that would be something for you to consider monitoring.
Mm. Okay, that's great. Fun question from Francis, who's in the UK. Could you talk about the difference between butterfly ranunculus and regular ones? I think that's a great question that we just skipped right over.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually just growing butterfly ranunculus this year for the first time. I guess what I can say about them is that the corms are very different. They're massive, so they're a bigger corm. I have found and just, and diving into this, that what most people find is that your butterfly corms are going to take a lot longer to sprout. So almost twice as much time. So it can feel a little bit like, wait, nothing's going on with them. And then they need a wider spacing because that larger corm, they're just going to be a bigger plant. So we almost doubled, I think we doubled our spacing for our butterflies. And then that's kind of where I'm at in my butterfly ranunculus journey. That's one of those ones where I was saying that I had never wanted to spend the money on, buying in a bunch of them. And so this year, I bought, I think 40 in from a flower farm. So I'm excited to try. And then my plan there is like, as I'm learning, because I feel that I hope I've expressed that like there's so much to learn about this flower. Then that's the kind of thing that I go back and just kind of add in my course, like all about butterfly ranunculus and kind of what I've learned there.
That will be the bonus chapter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, back not to like make this a sales pitch, but it sounds like once you sign up for the course, you have lifetime access. So Brooks updates will, especially if there's some hot new cultivar that's out, you'll have comments to share with people. They can check in and get that new additional information.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Did you want to talk about how you're pricing the course? Because I don't think you've addressed that yet. And
Yeah,
we've
yeah,
covered most of the
absolutely.
questions here.
Yeah, so yeah, okay, so just like 30 seconds about my course. Like what I really wanted to do for it was to just make it something that was like quick and simple and affordable, but also comprehensive. So it's a $47 course, it's lifetime access. I'm a teacher nerd, so there will be updates. Like I already have things that I'm like, don't go in and update yet, like, but I will do that. And what I really tried to do with it is not just to say like what and how you need to do a thing, but more like when and why. Because I think that that's for me with ranunculus, when I started to really understand it in my context, then that's when things really started to click. And I've gotten some really great feedback on the course already. And the biggest thing that, if you want your name in the hat for the giveaway is that in the first lesson, you'll make a personalized growing plan for your zone, and your context. And then that's kind of the thing that will guide you through the whole time.
Mm, that's really helpful. And actually, it sounds like you have this quiz on your website that is
Yeah, yep,
available to
that's a free
anyone.
quiz. Yep. And I would encourage you to take it and answer differently, really, and kind of see what the different responses are, because that will start to help you understand a little bit like, oh, what would be the difference between spring planting and fall planting?
And I feel like, Brooke, what I think is the most important, valuable takeaway today is that this is not a one size fits all
Mhm.
botanical, uh, you know, ingredient. You have to really personalize it. And I never knew that before.
I think that's why it seems to be the trickiest flower to grow is, yeah, exactly that it's like, do it this way. And it just doesn't really work like that. But
Mm.
that being said, there also is, and that's why like, it's a little course because it's not like there are a million things to know either. You just need to know a few things and kind of get it locked in, and then you'll be good to go.
That's great. There is one more, a lot of thank yous. A lot of people really appreciate this session today. And I mean, this is a great value to have you as a Slow Flowers member because our members are so generous when they share their knowledge with each other. And that is really helpful to just, I mean, this is the time of year to be thinking about our ranunculus, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, especially here because so we fall planted, but we're just about to start our second succession that we will spring plant. So, in the cooler zones, like the window is very much just opening right now.
Mm, mm. Kathy has one more question. She is from Alberta, Canada. Is it typical? Is the typical 3 months from to bloom from soak to bloom, or is it from roots forming to bloom? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I talked about that in my course too, that they say like 90 days with ranunculus, and right? And so I think that that assumes that it's going to, it's going to bloom perfectly starting May 15th. You count back 90 days. The reality is that timeline's pretty off. Like if you're planting out in October or November, or even in February, you're still not going to get your blooms for more than 90 days. So I think it's probably rare to time it where you get that, but I do think it can happen if you're spring planting in some zones.
And the reason that's important is to if you are going to have like a really hot spring, you need to plant
Correct. Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's where the like getting it in before the last frost
Hmm,
is.
hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
Wow.
something that in my course too that I share is like that whole strategy of planting getting the right timing for ranunculus, it's actually the right timing for a lot of flowers, right? It's like Icelandic poppies and even, Nigella or feverfew. Like there's so many flowers that kind of open up once you figure out that timing in your zone.
That's great. Now, I wanted to mention that our sponsor, Longfield Gardens, is running a 15% off spring promotion for a lot of spring planted bulbs, including ranunculus. Brooke, you have inventory on your website, and do you want to talk about what is available and how you like what are the bag sizes and that sort
Yeah,
of thing?
sure. Yeah, we have 20 corm packs on my website. What we mostly have is a custom mix that we made this year. So we took there's a yellow orange mix, and then we took pink and salmon, a few colors, and we did a formula mix, which means every set has the exact number of them. And that's because for a lot of people, they don't want to buy like 40 or 60. I found like home gardeners when they're starting out, and this way you can sort of try out a bunch of colors in one. And then I think maybe there's a violet, and there might be one other single
Mm.
color on there.
So you're kind of curating the
Yeah.
collections.
Hmm.
Well, that's awesome. And you're shipping now probably for
Or
people.
shipping. Yep. Hmm.
That's wonderful. Well, this has been such a refreshing conversation. I put my wish list out to Brooke before we started. But I'm going to just say it to everybody. We're planning for American Flowers Week, which is June 28th to July 4th. I know we've got some non-Americans in this chat, but that's okay. You can help us too. I would love a botanical couture fashion look with ranunculus and if anyone's interested, get in touch because I would love to see, wouldn't a corset with all ranunculus flower heads be gorgeous? And I don't know, how do you think that they would last out of water for a day, Brooke, when they're cut and glued to a base?
Well, they have a great vase life, so I tend to think anything with a great vase life probably handles out of water a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to ask Francoise Weeks about this because she's giving a whole session on botanical couture at the Slow Flower Summit, and she has a lot of techniques for once you've created something with flowers, like a wearable garment, how you can store it for 24 to 48 hours in a hydration chamber to keep it plump
Whoa.
and juicy. So it looks great for the photography. So that's just, I'm throwing that out there. Anything else you want to add, Brooke, before we wrap up?
I don't think so. If you do end up following me on social media, send me a DM. I really love to chat with people. I'm trying to do the social is social approach where I really actually connect with people. So please say hi.
Yes, and you're going to want to hear people's success stories. So
Oh,
that's what
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm so inspired by some of the comments here. I wanted to read one more to you. That Janet Kramka from Connecticut said, "This has been really helpful information. I've been farming for 5 years, but I'm just starting to venture into ranunculus." So go, Janet, go. That's great. I think I better get my act together and plant some more. I have some in raised beds, but they just kind of surprise me every year because I forget that those corms have been in there, wintering over in zone 9A,
Yeah.
Seattle.
Yeah. You've got a little more forgiveness over
Yeah,
there.
exactly. We have people here today from 10 states and Australia and the UK and Canada. So, Brooke, that's pretty impressive.
That's
That
so
this
fun. I
topic
love
is
it.
there's wide level of interest, and I'm just so happy that we could talk about it.